less violent planet. It was no longer being bombarded by giant meteors from space. The great ice ages had passed. Nothing yet lived on the land, but in the warm and shallow seas which fringed the continents there was a rich diversity of life. Fish had not yet evolved jaws, so these Arandapsis, the distant ancestors of terrestrial life, remained close to the coast where they could feed. Segmented creatures, the trilobites had diversified into many species. Just beneath the surface, the mantle is made up from molten rock, which moves slowly with the force of gravity. The movement is both circular as well as vertical. This convection drives the restless drifting of the continents. Oceans are drained as the land masses collide. But the waters move elsewhere, and so new environments are born. Continents move very slowly, but over millions of years, the changes are dramatic. But not only were the continents being forced to change, life was also modifying its shape. An arms race had begun. In the French National Museum of Natural History, Dr. Daniel Gouget has studied this period of prehistory and the armored and predatory fish that had evolved. 410 million years ago, giant predators were hunting the oceans. These creatures had developed a new and mighty weapon, the jaw.
With the invention of the jaw, you get to a new possibility for the animal to become a predator.
They have a unique skeletal structure that does not exist in any fish today. The front part of its body was shielded in hard, armor-like bones. Instead of teeth, they had bony plates in their mouths, which acted like a pair of razor-sharp scissors. With strong jaws, the placoderms dominated the seas of the Devonian period. They were like armored sharks. Our early ancestors had no chance against predators like these.
The Osteichthians were there, but they were absolutely under the dominance of these placoderms, which were adapted to all kinds of environment. They represent about 75 to 80% of the vertebrates you find in the Devonian. So our Osteichthian ancestors were certainly in the shadow of the placoderms because they couldn't develop.
Over millions of years, the jawless fish, Arandaspis, had become extinct. But one of the fish that had evolved was this, called Eusthenopteron. Science knows it as one of the lobed-finned fishes, and this one was the stepping stone to the creatures which would eventually come to walk on land. It was a good swimmer, but could not compete with the placoderms, so it had to seek alternatives. Life was now becoming a series of strategies, both for predator and prey. Strategies that were sometimes dictated by the Earth itself. The clues are in the rocks and the history of the continents as they shift. The fossil record now is widely scattered, but when we move back in time, the sites move together to where the creatures once lived. The interior of this continent was empty, a dry desert with no life. But when the continents clashed, the force threw up a great mountain range. We know it as the Caledonian Mountains. The northernmost site of those ancient mountains are in Norway, here at Sognefjord. The folds and curves in the rocks can only hint at the forces which are at work in the Earth. At the point of collision, solid rock can bend and twist as the massive forces at work blend one vast landmass with the next. When the ancient continents of Baltica and Laurentia met, they shaped the hard rocks as if they were putty in the hands of a potter. This sinuous rock formation is known by geologists as a fold. Here is another part of those vanished mountains at Monreath Bay in Scotland. 430 million years ago, these twisted and tortured rocks, folding over and upon each other, were also part of the shoreline of the Aaptis Sea. The southern tip of the collision is in the east of the United States. This too was once a part of the Caledonian Range. The strata folds its way for thousands of miles from the USA to Norway. But of greater interest to prehistorians is what happened when the Caledonian Mountains were forced up, when the ancient Aaptis Sea was drained and the rich diversity of life it sheltered was abruptly forced to seek alternatives. The Earth may seem a permanent place, but it is restless and responsive to the forces that surge beneath its surface. The formation of continents, seas, and mountain ranges take millions of years, but the power is awesome. Mountains were forced up for over 40 million years. Geologists believe that some of the peaks were almost as high as Mount Everest. But what is intriguing is that many fossils of those creatures, which were our early ancestors, are found where the foothills of the Caledonian Range once stood. The moisture-laden winds are halted by the peaks. They rise and cool, then rain falls in torrents. Parts of the sea were moved inland. They became rivers, and then where the country flattened, the water spread out to become freshwater lakes. New environments were created, new frontiers to challenge life. Some plant life had evolved, but its grip on the land was tenuous. Often the land was bone dry, and when it rained, the force of the rushing water would erode the soil, taking with it the mosses and ferns which struggled to grow. The lakes, when they were tranquil, must have been inviting environments, just out of reach. But life itself took a part in the opening up of these new freshwater habitats. The rock face alongside this river was once the edge of an ancient freshwater lake. 370 million years ago, this was at the foothills of the ancient Caledonian Range. Today, it's called Red Hill in the state of Pennsylvania. This was the site of one of the earliest known forests. These leaves are from the earliest known trees on the planet, which spread their branches and changed the world. The tree is called Archaeopteris. Scientists think that it was not unlike today's conifers, the pines and larches with thin needle-like leaves. They had roots which spread wide and deep and would help bind the soil when the floods came. Like today's trees, the trunk thickened with every year of growth, and scientists believe that it may have grown as tall as 20 meters, just over 60 feet. What it gave to life was shelter from the sun. Dr. Stephen Scheckler has studied the impact that Archaeopteris had, both upon the environment and the life that was in lakes and swamps.
We'll just get under that piece and use that as a lever to help. This is a good-sized Archaeopteris stump. It's the kind that's pretty typical for the trees of this time.
Yeah, that'd be 25 centimeters.
25 centimeters, okay. Yeah. So, that's another big one. Then we got some small ones here. Exactly, yeah.
Should I slide back to here now?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
By marking the fossiled stumps, he and his students can then work out how dense this ancient forest may have been.
This young forest behind us, I think, is actually a very close analog to the appearance of what the first Archaeopteris forest would have looked like. Trees with white bark that are bare now would have been about the size of the early Archaeopteris. So the whole ecosystem was transformed by the introduction of Archaeopteris. What previously had been an open environment with relatively low primary productivity became a closed canopy environment with much higher rate of productivity.
This was the first forest canopy to provide shade and shelter. These trees spread their pine-like needles and provided protection, helped the soil to retain moisture, which in turn would help other plant communities. They helped change the landscape. Their influence didn't stop on land. Archaeopteris grew along the lake shores and helped change this environment too. Archaeopteris shed their branches, which then fell into the water, would eventually become waterlogged and sink to the lake floor. They would decay, their nutrients would be leached out into the lake waters so that the trees provided both food and shelter for the fish. The fossil record shows that our distant ancestors moved into lake environments at around the same time as the predators. There were still challenges, but one of them would help life to make the next great step on the miracle planet. In the world today, mountains still play their part in shaping the land, as well as the life that lives on it. In South America, the Amazon rainforest needs the waters that run off the mountains after rain. The deluges of the wet season spread out through the rainforest, one of the richest ecosystems on Earth. When the forest is flooded, it provides nutrients and shelter for an amazing diversity of fish life. The armored pleco looks almost prehistoric, while the predatory arowana glides through the sunken forest. So frequent is the flooding that the trees have also adapted to spending much of their lives inundated. They provide both food and shelter to help sustain the rich variety of life. The muddy waters of the Amazon and other rainforest rivers perhaps can give us a glimpse of what life might have been like when it adapted to fresh water. The Amazon does not remain flooded all through the year. After the wet season, the sun begins to wield its power. By June, the waters dry up and can drop in some places by as much as 18 meters, almost 60 feet. And when it does drop, there are winners and losers. As the water becomes hot, there is little oxygen for the fish, so they flounder on the surface desperately trying to take gulps of air. But there is none to be had, so they die to become food for the scavengers. Yet around them, oxygen is everywhere. Scientists believe that 370 million years ago, the world would have experienced similar shifts in the annual climate. And yet again, the trees played their part. While their fallen branches gave shelter, the bacteria contributing to this breakdown consumed oxygen, thus depleting the levels in the water. Today in the Amazon and elsewhere, there are fish that can handle this. The lungfish, relics from the past that are able to take oxygen as normal fish do from the water. But they can also breathe air. And when the Amazon dries up, this fish will survive, often buried in wet mud, breathing as we do, with lungs. Recent research shows that lungfish are close relatives to our distant ancestors who lived in the shallows when the first forests took root on land. Dr. Per Alberg has studied Eusthenopteron, and he believes that our distant ancestor had lungs like the lungfish of today.
The lungfishes moved into a freshwater swamp environment at the same time as the earliest tetrapods, and right alongside them we find them together in the same strata. So when we look at modern day lungfishes and how their respiration works, what we're looking at is probably something that's closely convergent onto early tetrapods. Lungs evolved in all likelihood to help the animal to breathe when living in warm, tropical waters with a low oxygen content.
This is the way science believes early fish developed lungs. First, the upper part of the esophagus, the airway, swelled and formed the precursor of a lung. Moving from the sea into the fresh water made this become larger. The inner surface was covered with capillary vessels to absorb more oxygen, which was essential for survival in those early lakes.
If lungs had not been present in our ancestry, there is no way that our ancestors would have made it to become truly competent terrestrial animals. We would still be flopping around in the shallows today.
Modern fish are the descendants of those early lungfish. But the lung of the modern fish is no longer used for breathing. Instead, it has evolved into an air bladder, which helps it keep its equilibrium when it changes depth in the water. Most of the ancient fish that stayed in the ocean did not develop lungs, so they eventually became extinct. But to step on land, you need to be able to walk as well as breathe. And that was the next challenge to be met on the miracle planet. Muddy streams are as good as anywhere to look for the evidence of those first creatures which began to make the move from water to land. Dr. Jennifer Clack from Cambridge University in England made a remarkable find in East Greenland. The fossil in this rock has been dated at 360 million years, and it belongs to an early tetrapod, creatures which developed limbs. Even more remarkable, it clearly has fingers. It's the first record of any animal with a hand and fingers. The creature is called Acanthostega, and from the fossil, Dr. Clack has made detailed sketches of what she and other experts think the animal looked like. The tail appears to be made up from fins, more characteristic of a fish than a reptile. Looks like a fish, except it has limbs rather than fins. But its skull was stronger than the skull of a fish, and she believes it was able to move its neck. It evolved from fish that made their way into the fresh water and could breathe air when they had to for survival. But where the earlier fish had fins, it developed limbs. It was a strange creature, about 1 meter or 3 feet long. Until now, the fossil evidence had only ever revealed creatures with 5 fingers. It had 8.
That was extraordinary, because previous to that, it had always been assumed that 5 digits was the primitive number, and you couldn't have more than 5. So that really got us thinking about the origin of limbs, and it put a new spin on the whole story of where limbs came from and how they developed. Not much longer than here, but you've got that big sort of fleshy body around, full of muscles that move.
To start with, she believed that the limbs had obviously evolved for it to walk on land. Detailed analysis of the skeleton ruled out that possibility. From the way that the limbs were joined to the body, they would not have been able to carry weight out of the water.
Which is much longer than the ulna there. You don't find that anywhere. Have them again, not all. So
Mystery.
But they certainly go back in evolution to Eustenopteron and things like that, because they'd had them. They go back right to the beginning. The humerus and the radius and ulna are fixed at an angle that wouldn't allow the limb to bend like that. The articulations here and here suggest that the arm is carried sideways and that there's no weight-bearing function.
They performed detailed skeletal analysis and then made a computer model of the creature. But this produced even more questions. The animal was able to wriggle its way forward through the water, almost as if it was swimming. But it would have been very slow without fins. So why hands with fingers? A possible answer came once again from Red Hill, the site of the first known forest. Here is also evidence of rich and varied life in a freshwater lake. Dr. Ted Deschler from the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia has been working here.
Fin spine of an acanthodian fish and made for a rigid pectoral fin.
Amongst other fossils, he has found one which gives a hint to the development of these fingers. It's a large tooth.
It might be juvenile.
This is a single tooth of Hyneria. The other tetrapods, such as Acanthostega and Ichthyostega and a few others from around the world, also lived in these freshwater environments in the late Devonian, along with predators like Hyneria. And that may have been part of the pressure which made the early tetrapods specialize in shallow water, using their early rudimentary limbs to get into shallow water and swamps to escape predation.
Hyneria would have been a ferocious hunter. Fossils indicate that it was covered with hard scales like armor and was a fast-swimming predator, something to hide from.
Hyneria would have been the most ferocious fish in the ecosystems at Red Hill. The body form in Hyneria is clearly an animal that was able to swim very quickly, start fast, chase its prey, grab its prey with huge teeth. On the contrary, the earliest limbed animals do not seem like they had the same kind of body plan to escape. So our ancestors and Hyneria was not a fair match.
When the early fish moved into fresh water, it was probably to escape its predators. But they also had primitive lungs and followed.
It's interesting to see the limbs moving in 3 dimensions.
Dr. Clack was intrigued by the limbs of our early ancestor.
I would expect these bones to be moving backwards and forwards relative to the humerus, which they don't seem to be doing.
There are clues in a fish still swimming in Australian waters, the spotted handfish. It uses its slightly modified fins to clasp rocks on the sea floor or to wait in ambush for its prey.
So Acanthostega might have been doing something similar in its swampy river. It could have been pushing aside reeds and undergrowth that you can't really do with fins. We see the environment as being monsoonal, similar in some ways to the Amazon rainforest. And you have to imagine a swamp-filled environment with lots of weedy undergrowth, as well as leaves falling in from the trees that lived on the riverbank.
The early trees, by chance, not only dropped their leaves, more often they dropped entire branches. These would pile up in the shallows and provide an ideal hiding place. To move through such a tangled pile of branches, hands with fingers would be very useful. Possibly this was the reason our ancestor developed limbs.
Because these things were air-breathing and they were living in perhaps stagnant water, they were using their hands as props to raise the head out of the water so that they could breathe the air.
Chance has always seemed to play a part in evolution.
Ultimately, once you've got these slightly intermediate types of adaptations that are adapted to neither land nor water, but a bit of both, then you can build on that and gradually, over time, become adapted to more and more to land living properly.
There was one more step to take. The creature that was first to walk on land would not be Acanthostega. The earliest known footsteps on land are here on the west coast of Ireland. This was once a swamp at the foot of the Caledonian Mountains. These footprints were found in 1992. There were 260 steps made by an animal which put weight on the ground and moved its right and left feet forward alternately, like reptiles walk today. Those first footsteps may have been at night when it was cooler and safer. The earliest known animal to walk on land is called pedipes and came ashore perhaps 348 million years ago. Those first tentative steps across land were to change the earth forever. Once life had conquered the land, nothing seemed to be able to stop it. For almost another 100 million years, life spread across the world. But one dramatic moment in time would see the virtual extinction of all species. These rocks are in an area of dry and arid country in South Africa, known as the Great Karoo. This was once a stream bed, about 250 million years ago. In the rocks are the tracks of the strange creatures which ruled the Earth before the dinosaurs. Dr. Roger Smith of the South African Museum has studied these creatures for years.
Here's a fantastic trackway of a Dinocephalian, and it tells us quite a lot about how this animal walked. I'll just pose myself into its tracks and we'll see if we can move like a Dinocephalian.
The animal that made these tracks was around 9 feet, perhaps the length of a Komodo dragon today. These extinct creatures were reptiles, but they had some of the same characteristics that mammals have today. Dr. Smith is fascinated as to why they all became extinct at the same time. We know very little about them. It is thought they laid eggs, as do reptiles today. Yet for millions of years, they seem to be the dominant animals on the Earth. Some were herbivores, and some predators, with large and sharp fangs.
The mammal-like reptiles are not as well known as the dinosaurs. Perhaps it would become quite a surprise to know that there was such a diversity of very large, very successful, very well-adapted animals, and in fact, animals from which formed our human ancestors way back, that they were around at least 50 million years before the dinosaurs, so that the dinosaurs weren't the first ruling reptiles, in fact, of the planet.
But their legacy was perhaps crucial for the miracle planet. This is the world about 250 million years ago. Plants were abundant, so too was oxygen. Amongst the strange mammal-like reptiles, one is thought to be the distant ancestor of mammals.
Now, the Therapsids are now completely extinct, but around 250 million years ago, they were the most common, the most widespread animal on the land surfaces of both Gondwana and of Laurasia, that whole supercontinent of Pangaea. These were the ruling animals at that time. Now, the other interesting thing about these animals is they were a transitional form between reptiles and mammals. So they were neither true reptiles, nor were they proper mammals yet.
This was almost a crossroad in evolution. It's this creature, called a cynodont, which is believed to be the ancestor of mammals. While this little lizard-like creature is thought to be the ancestor of dinosaurs. The moment when 95% of species went extinct is marked clearly by a boundary line, where the rocks seemed to change. Below that line, there was rich and varied life. Above, virtually nothing.
Moist conditions. They are this bluish-grey color, typical of soils which are almost permanently saturated, high water tables and cool conditions. As we pass through the boundary, through the extinction event, we go into these dark reddish-brown mud rocks.
Here, at the same time, it is also possible to see color changes in the rocks. The geological evidence seems to point towards a massive rise in global temperature, also a sudden decrease in oxygen levels. These are the fossilized remains of animals clustered around what Dr. Smith calls the last pool. He thinks that this may have been a drying up waterhole which attracted many that were desperate to drink. But as the water dried, they could not move away and died of thirst.
We would look at layer by layer through up to that boundary, and of all the Permian fauna, only about 5% actually got through. So this was 95% extinction of the animals and of the plants that were around on the land surface at that time. And this is being backed up by similar work being done in the oceans, but it's a very, very catastrophic, in fact, the most catastrophic mass extinction that we've ever recorded.
In this fossilized picture of death, it seems almost as if life had gone full circle. It had survived fire and ice and had grown after the rise of oxygen, seeming to end when once again the climate changed. The changes brought about by the mass extinction came from the Earth itself, the most massive outpourings of lava and gas ever known. But out of death came life on the miracle planet.